Welcome in, gang. Coach is extremely pumped and proud to have you for this one. He's going to give you the World Series. Coach is super pumped. We obviously had a really hard time this year, but Coach is like damn sure we've got it in the bag now. So you know Coach originally really liked the Guardians to beat the Brewers. Okay? Now, we won't get into all that again, right? But we do know the Tigers beat the Guardians. And Coach isn't going to lie to you. As far as like the bets and stuff, it certainly wasn't the best scenario, right? But the Guardians were not only not the only team I took, but they weren't even the team with the furthest odds. We actually had more money in on the Brewers, right? As far as like potential payout. Now, and they're still alive. So Coach needed to emotionally recover because that was the real damage that was done with the Guardians. Coach genuinely has a soft spot for Cleveland and wants them to win it. We now know the Guardians' name is almost certainly cursed and they have to win it as the Indians. And Coach is cool with that. But Coach was hesitant to make any sort of call because he was emotionally tilted in both leagues. In the National League, Coach wanted it to be the Brewers for financial gain, right? And that alone was a reason for Coach to not want to go anywhere near it. It's like, okay, we clearly have, a bias, right? We're going to want the Dodgers to win. Or I'm sorry, we're going to want the Brewers to win. So we're going to find ways, to try to think of how they can do it, and it'll probably end up being a reach, right? So Coach didn't really want anything to do with the National League. And in the American League, Coach thought he had his team, including his World Series winner, but there was one potential problem, okay? Now, the Tigers were that potential problem. Coach could not stomach the idea of somehow him being so in on the Guardians and it's the fucking Tigers winning it the same year we have the Lions winning the Super Bowl. Like, that would have been absolutely inexcusable. That Coach didn't sniff that out. I honestly never believed in them, right? But it was way too scary. You know what I mean? Like, it was just set up perfectly. Like, we had this miracle run this year. They knock us out after we knocked them out of their miracle run last year. It was just scary stuff. So Coach needed to see Detroit go home, right? So when Coach was looking at all the scenarios, we had a few more, right? Because we also had Detroit. Coach also wants to point out that if you flip around the letters in Detroit, it spells riot, okay? And Detroit, obviously very famous for their riots. Now, so we know the Detroit ones are no longer a go, right? So that gave us 4 less possibilities. Coach thought he knew what was going on, but he wanted it to be narrowed down a little bit more, and he wants to get this video out pretty much immediately because there's an elimination game in the National League tonight, and that'll make it even fewer to choose from. And obviously, it's not nearly as impressive the fewer options you have to call it, right? So now we no longer have Brewers beating Detroit, Detroit beating Brewers, Dodgers beating Detroit, or Detroit beating the Dodgers as options. Okay, these are your possibilities for the World Series. It could be the Dodgers beating the Blue Jays beating the Dodgers, the Mariners beating the Cubs beating the Mariners, Blue Jays beating the Cubs beating the Blue Jays, Brewers beating Seattle, or Seattle beating the Brewers. Okay, so we have 2, 4, 6. There are 8 different combinations. Okay, so if we're talking about at random, Coach has like a 12.5% chance to get this right. So pretty fucking solid, right? Like, it's not like, 50-50, right? Like, Coach still doesn't love that we didn't know it was going to be the Eagles beating the Chiefs, right? We knew it was a possibility, but we really thought they were pulling the skins there, right? So then it comes down to, and it's basically like a 50-50, and it's like, that's not nearly as impressive. Like, yeah, we knew the Chiefs were losing the whole way, right? But we didn't even have the right team. So now that Coach called this one a little bit earlier, this is going to be a better win than the Super Bowl. Coach is calling it now. Dude, Coach is ready to freak out. This World Series is fucking awesome. There's no way this isn't what they're doing. It is. Are we talking Dodgers, Blue Jays? No. Blue Jays, Dodgers? No. Mariners, Cubs? Fuck no. Cubs, Mariners? Blue Jays, Cubs? Nope. Cubs, Blue Jays, no. And we know the Brewers aren't fucking winning it. So that leaves one option. And boy, is it fucking sweet. Coach knew as soon as he saw it, he was like, there's something there. I don't know what it is, but those two teams, like, there's something in my brain that connects them as, like, legitimately, that's a badass fucking World Series. The coach is looking around, right, trying to figure out what's going on. Now, the first thing that popped into Coach's mind is that Seattle hasn't made it this far in 24 years. 24 years ago, Randy Johnson won the World Series after leaving Seattle, right? So pretty much their biggest pitcher ever, right, leaves town, wins the World Series without him when they have their best team, right? It's pretty reasonable to argue that if he was on that Mariners team still, they would have won it, right? Now, as far as as far as the Mariners themselves, they've never even appeared in a World Series. How fucking sweet is that? So we're taking a team that's never even appeared in a World Series to beat the Brewers, who, guessed what? Just a little bit ago, lost a heartbreaker in Game 7 that kept them from the World Series at the hands of the fucking Dodgers, who they're set to face if they can knock off the Cubs tonight. And they have home field the whole way through, including the World Series. Everyone's going to take the Brewers to beat the Mariners. Coach is telling you it's the damn Mariners. Okay, they've got some history here. Let's find it. Check this out. Coach hasn't read this yet, but you already know. Eerie parallels of baseball history in Seattle and Milwaukee. Ooh, what do we got here? Mariners made the playoffs for the first time in 21 years. Subset of diehard fans that hope the Milwaukee Brewers might also make it to the postseason in 2022. The reasons are complicated, but let's just say the Seattle-Milwaukee baseball rivalry goes way back, and the cities have a surprising number of things in common when it comes to professional sports. Admittedly, the story evolved a bit since it first hatched last week, and it ended up with me having a lot more sympathy for baseball fans in Milwaukee than I've had before. Don't forget, Euchre died, right? For a long time, some have harbored a fantasy whereby the Seattle Mariners would face the Milwaukee Brewers in the World Series. More about why below. Unfortunately, the Brewers, who have made the playoffs for a team record 4 seasons straight, were mathematically eliminated this past Monday night. Many people already know the first essential fact of the story. The Brewers began life as the 1969 American League expansion team called the Seattle Pilots. Coach did not fucking know that. How did we miss that? That never came up, and we definitely dug on the Brewers. Right, so the Pilots were terrible, and they played in the decaying Six Stadium. Six, like the note. What the fuck? Rainier Avenue. The voter-approved Kingdom, Rainier too, right? Like rain, Seattle, was to be built for them eventually, but Major League Baseball was in a hurry to add expansion teams so that Kansas City could field the Royals in 1969. Their official theme song was Go, Go, You Pilots, penned by local sportscaster Rod Belcher. Ugh. The Pilots went bankrupt after one season, and by the spring of 1970, go they did. Milwaukee businessman and future baseball commissioner Bud Selig, Terrence Bud Crawford, just became world champion. There's a bunch of Buds out there, though. Coach ain't gonna front. Snatched them away from Seattle just 6 days before opening day, 1970, and renamed them the Brewers. There was so little time to spare, the Brewers had to adopt Seattle colors and wear Seattle uniforms with Pilots patches torn off. But then, since King County voters had approved the Kingdom, fucking, the Chiefs got a big series on ESPN right now called Kingdom. They got a big book they published called Kingdom, right? So Kingdom, Gorton, right? That's like Gordon, Slade Gorton. That's how Seattle got the Mariners, who debuted in 1977. Ooh, 48 years ago, we know they love 1984 Orwell. Same year as their 2022 playoff opponents, the Toronto Blue Jays. That makes it a little bit dicey, right? Like, it could be Blue Jays beating the Brewers. Coach says, no fucking way, dude. It's Seattle. It is Seattle. Fuck the Blue Jays. Okay, sorry, Cat. I promise you, before Coach goes down, he'll give the Blue Jays a World Series. Not this year. Now, about that World Series fantasy, the former Seattle Pilots, now Milwaukee Brewers, were an American League team in 1970, but that changed in 1998 when the Brewers moved to the National League. At that moment, it became hypothetically possible for the Mariners to face the Brewers in the World Series someday. Thus, for the franchise purists and the radio historians who like to carry on an esoteric grudge or 10, this would mean a fall classic pitting Seattle against Seattle, the living versus the ghosts, the Mariners versus the Pilots. I've wondered if anybody else thought about this potential matchup, especially in and around the Brewers' home turf, so I tracked down a sports writer in Milwaukee to test my theory. J.R. Radcliffe writes for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He told Kiro News Radio there are indeed a handful of significant modern baseball connections between Wisconsin and Seattle. Manager Scott Servais is from La Crosse. Outfielder Jared Kalenich is from Waukesha. And outfielder Mitch Haniger, remember Mitch Marner, like Mariner, was traded, was for a time a minor leaguer for the Brewers. But other than that, those are probably the connections, Radcliffe said. I really don't think many people with the Brewers think too much about the Seattle Pilots, I'm afraid. But Radcliffe also said there are people who obsess about Milwaukee's baseball past, and specifically about the Milwaukee Braves. That's what Coach knew about. This was going back to an earlier era and a deeper layer of history. That's why the Brewers won't beat the fucking Seattle Mariners. They don't give a fuck about Seattle. Seattle cares that Brewers stole their team. That's what this is about. This is not about the Brewers, okay? The Braves have played in Atlanta since 1966, and just last year they beat the Brewers in the playoff series on the way to winning the World Series. But as some surely know, me not included, from 1953 to 1965, the Braves were Milwaukee's team. Radcliffe says that in Milwaukee, nearly 60 years after they left, the Braves were still almost mythical, and he put me in touch with one of the most dedicated torchbearers of the Braves legacy, Bob Boeige. Right, we got another Bob, president of the Milwaukee Braves Historical Association. President Boeige was there when the Braves arrived in Milwaukee in 1953. Don't forget the Lions won in 1953, too. It's hard to overstate how the fans are reactive. It's just insane. Boeige talked Kiro News Radio. I was a kid. I was not quite 7 when they moved here in the city. I mean, they went crazy over this team after waiting half a century. You can imagine the reaction. When they arrived from spring training in 1953, they came up through Chicago on a train and they disembarked on Wisconsin Avenue, Boeige continued. And there was a parade set up. They had open convertibles, and from that moment on, I mean, everybody in the area knew they were in the Major League. Here, Boeige described 1953 marked the beginning of an incredible era for Major League Baseball in Milwaukee. Of course, it should be pointed out here that the Braves' move was no victimless crime. The team had moved from Boston, which broke some hearts in Massachusetts, but at least Beantown still had the Red Sox. Boeige said the Milwaukee Braves were good and then got great. Fans loved them, and they broke all kinds of league attendance records, attracting more than 2 million people in a single season. Future Hall of Famers like Warren Spahn and Hank Aaron were on the roster, and the Braves won the World Series in 1957, 68 years ago, and won the pennant again in 58. It was a golden age for fans and the team. When Boeige mentioned that Milwaukee had waited half a century to get a Major League team, I wasn't sure what he meant. So he explained that delay of more than 50 years, I started to develop feelings of empathy for Bob and other longtime Milwaukee baseball fans feel a little less bad about how Milwaukee stole the Pilots in 1970. Boeige said that in 1901, when the American League was created, Milwaukee was home to one of the original 8 teams. That team was called, you guessed it, the Milwaukee Brewers. Does the next part sound somewhat familiar? They were not successfully financial. They played in a dumpy ballpark and was nothing attractive, and so they stayed 1 year. Wait a minute. Was Bob now talking about the 69 Pilots? Oh, what do you know? History repeats itself, right? Boeige was describing the inaugural season of 1901 Milwaukee Brewers of the American League, but he could have been describing the Pilots. The parallels are downright eerie. Boeige says the original American League Brewers left after one season, moved in 1902 to St. Louis, and changed their name to the Browns. We got the Browns in the fucking Super Bowl, yo. They eventually moved to Baltimore in 1954 and became the Orioles. Thus, when the Braves arrived at that Heroes Walking Parade in 1953, Milwaukee had been waiting for an incredible 52, flip of 25, it's 2025, years to get a Major League Baseball team back in Wisconsin. In comparison, Seattle only had to wait 7 years for the Mariners after the Pilots left. Though for NBA fans, it's been 14 years and counting since the Sonics decamped for Oklahoma City, who just won the fucking NBA Finals, people. Oddly enough, with the Braves, Milwaukee had only about a decade-long love affair with the team before it all went sour. The Braves weren't terrible. They never had a losing season in Milwaukee, but a new owner from Chicago named William Bartholomew took over in 1962. Coach wants to shout out one more thing he's going to forget. The Randy Johnson thing. That's what they referenced when Scooball smashed the Guardians batter in the face. They were like, oh, remember Randy Johnson hitting that bird? Right? So, and they said it multiple times. Let's see. So it was definitely a memo that went around, right? So he and his investors started shopping around better TV market. Atlanta was on the rise, blah, blah. We know about that. So yeah, we know about the Braves.